Hello there. My name is Dr. John Hemmings. I'm the Senior Director for the Indo-Pacific Program here at Pacific Forum. And I'd like to thank you for joining us on behalf of Pacific Forum and our sponsors, the Henry Luce Foundation. I'm very pleased to welcome you today to a wonderful webinar, which we've arranged as a sort of a secondary element to a research project we carried out with a group of our young leaders from Southeast Asia. The topic, of course, is pressing security concerns in Southeast Asia, a next generation perspective. And we have four very exciting authors who are going to present on their papers to you today. So I had the privilege and pleasure of actually editing these papers. And I've edited a lot of papers over the 15 years that I've been doing this, and I found them very original and very interesting and exciting. For one thing, they are as diverse and non-traditional, traditional. They are sort of reflective of the region itself, just so much variety there. We have, as I said, four speakers. We're going to go through them one by one. The initial way we'll do this is we'll have each speaker give their remarks for about 10 minutes, and they will have some slides from their reports. We will ask speakers to keep your cameras on when you're speaking, but off when you're not speaking. So if you turn off all cameras right now, and your mics as well, so we can have some microphone discipline. And then also at the very end, we'll follow up with a big discussion, a Q&A, in which we ask you to be engaged and fully enjoying the ability to interact with our young authors here. And in that case, I'll ask all of the panelists to please have their cameras on so that we can see them as a full panel. Right, okay, with that, I'm going to start by introducing our wonderful first speaker, who's Xiaozizi Wei, or Wei. She's a research associate at the Global Awareness and Impact Alliance. She's looking at politics and maritime security issues in Southeast Asia. She has had her work featured in Fair Observer and CSIS Indonesia. And she takes what I thought was an interesting and unique perspective, the Bruneian perspective on the South China Sea issue, which I'm sure many of you watching are aware of, but often as not, the Bruneian policy is to be somewhat circumspect. And so it was interesting to see this paper. So Wei, are you ready to go? Give me a thumbs up if you are ready to go, and we will dive right in. So with that, Wei, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to hearing your engagement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I begin, I would like to take a little bit of time to set up my slides, and I'll be with you shortly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wei, and I am a research associate from a nonprofit based in Brunei called the Global Awareness and Impact Alliance, or in short, GAIA. Firstly, thank you to Pacific Forum for the opportunity to write a chapter on a pressing issue around Southeast Asia, and today for me to present on my topic titled Caught in the Middle, the measured voice of Brunei's foreign policy amidst the South China Sea dispute. I will begin my presentation today by speaking on the current reality of the South China Sea, followed by an analysis on whether Brunei's claim on the South China Sea is what critics have dubbed as vanishing or calculated. Following that, I will provide a counter perspective of Brunei's foreign policy towards the highly disputed waters, and then an analysis on whether the Sultanate should change the language of its foreign policy or not. And with that, let's get started. With 161 kilometers of coastline next to the South China Sea, Brunei is a young sultanate with a population of only 440,715 people that claims a 200 nautical miles of the exclusive economic zone, otherwise known as the EEZ. With that, Brunei is also one out of 7 states of the South China Sea alongside Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, China, and Taiwan. In particular, it states its maritime jurisdiction based on its history as a former British colony by claiming Louisa Reef of the Spratly Islands, a land feature that lies within its EEZs and has also been disputed by China Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. To start, it is important to remind ourselves that Brunei is an absolute monarchy with a foreign policy that puts very high adherence to international law and universally recognized principles like the United Nations Charter and the ASEAN Charter. As such, the Sultanate has consistently strived and arguably succeeded to maintain good relations with all of its allies, among which includes rivals China and the United States, both of whom have been increasingly vocal over the South China Sea in the recent years. Regarding the South China Sea, both rivals have competing takes. For one, China has always based its activities over the highly disputed waters with the Nine Dash Line, historical claims it exerts over the South China Sea. In contrast, analysts have analyzed the reason for the persistent American presence may perhaps be a multifaceted one. For one, US government may argue that it is supporting the claimant states like the Philippines to uphold international order and freedom of navigation. However, other perspectives observe that their persistence may be for three other reasons. The first, the South China Sea is a major transit route for maritime commercial traffic to and from East Asia and the United States Navy. Two, disputes in the busy area will then result in conflict and instability, which then leads to three, an increase in Chinese influence that then becomes a detriment to the interests of the USA. As such, the possibility of a militarized South China Sea increases, and the sea is no longer a territorial dispute between the ASEAN claimant states and China. On top of protecting their own waters, claimant states now have to balance their own alliances between both China and the United States, caught in between the overall US-China dispute. For as long as the maritime disputes have persisted, Brunei has earned its moniker as the silent claimant of the South China Sea. Brunei's non-confrontational nature has been equated to criticisms such as vanishing and irregular by Putra 2020, Espana and Oi 2020 as well, bland, and even no regard whatsoever as to what happens in the South China Sea, that also by Putra 2020. Although the intention can be a push for economic diversification, some critics have concluded that Brunei's neglect was solidified through the development of trading industries, a petrochemical plant born from an agreement between Brunei and China to cooperate for oil and gas refinery purposes. In addition, critics have also noted that Brunei is the only claimant that does not have any military presence in the South China Sea. Despite criticisms of its quiet nature, Brunei has shown its calculativeness when it deems necessary, like when it released its own statement on the South China Sea in 2020, of which consisted of unfailing adherence to universally recognized principles and international law, like the United Nations Charter, the UNCLOS, as well as the ASEAN Charter. On this note, Brunei's political identity relies on the fact that one, it is the second richest country in ASEAN and is also oil producing as well. It is two, one of the last absolute monarchies in the world, but most importantly, three, it puts utmost priority in maintaining economic status quo with all parties while trying to retain its sovereignty. In other words, the determination of threats, opportunities, and defense strategies are all perceived, determined, and approved only by His Majesty the Sultan. For one, Brunei's relative silence can be attributed to the main prioritization of its domestic policies, like its national vision of Wawatan Brunei 2035. Simultaneously, Brunei's limited assertiveness can also be attributed to its integration of its ASEAN membership, and very high integration at that, to the bloc's non-interference principle into its national identity. Consequently, in this context, then, the lack of Brunei's voice in the 2016 arbitration, 2014 standoff with the Chinese vessels, can be reason to the fact that its own EEZs was not directly affected by the Chinese presence like its counterpart, even if it overlaps with a 9-dash line. In another observation of Brunei's calculativeness, Brunei in May 2022 announced a net-centric coastal surveillance system and acquired a new squadron from US-made drones for humanitarian and disaster relief search operations, border control, and law enforcement operations, as well as for surveillance and intelligence gathering. A significant move that announces an upward shift in the priorities when it comes to protecting their territorial waters, and an imperative action taken to heighten concerns they voiced in their 2021 defense white paper. Soon after, in July 2022, the first ever Brunei-China Trade and Economy Forum was launched. Brunei has also displayed the increase in its defense priorities through active participation in exercises with the Navy of both rivals. Most recently, the annual Cooperation Afloat Readiness and Training CARAT with the US Navy in October 2022, and even more recently in June 2023, maritime exercises with China's People's Liberation Army Navy training ship, Qingqi 1. In this light, the Sultanate has arguably succeeded in the game of balancing bilateral relationships between both rivals so far. So long that Brunei's territorial waters remain undisturbed, it is most likely continued in the way it has, a strategy that has worked well for the bilateral and multilateral relationship it has with all of its allies, on top of maintaining their own priorities, sovereignty, and national vision so far. And so, the big question is, did Brunei change the language of its foreign policy? And in my personal opinion, the answer is no. After all, every nation, including the two major rivals, are striving for economic development while maintaining their own sovereignty, even in international waters. In this regard, the expansion and development of alliances provide major powers with a plethora of opportunities, but simultaneously expand the premise and possibility for risk of disputes and contesting powers. As the smallest and youngest country in Southeast Asia, with the smallest claim in the South China Sea, Brunei is a small antagonist power in the horizon of cited interests by major powers and minilateral groups like AUKUS and the Quad on disputed waters. Small military size and oil and gas dependent economy are constantly at risk of fluctuations benefits to most outside the sea. At a young age of 38 and its identity as an absolute monarchy, Brunei is distinctly of a smaller caliber on all fronts, of its land area, population, size of its military arsenal, ability and scale, and experience in comparison to its company. As such, the current situation and statement, the friendly stances of the Sultanate towards all its counterparts is what it can actually afford, given its context. And in hindsight and in sum, Brunei's calmness is a necessity in increasingly polarized and volatile South China Sea disputes. The relative quietness of Brunei's foreign policy therefore can be argued to be more pragmatic as opposed to the criticisms it has received thus far. In the current context, tightening assertiveness, similar to fighting fire with fire, will arguably risk its overall national security. As such, Brunei must prepare itself for central challenges through comprehensive solutions to its all parties where they stand on international order. Moving forward, it is now the responsibility of the Sultanate to stress that the intention of strengthening language only if and when it deems necessary its foreign policy and the sovereign text is not to pick sides, but to rather to clarify, strengthen, and particularly reinforce about what it welcomes, expects, and follows. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
With that, thank you so much, Wei. I'm now going to move to our next speaker, Mr. Fikri Rahman. Fikri is the head of foreign affairs at Bait Al Amanah, a political and development research institute based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Interests include Southeast Asia regionalism, smaller state strategy, and the politics and geopolitics of digital connectivity cooperation, maritime security, and Malaysian domestic politics and foreign policy. And his chapter, which you can find in our online edition, of which this event is a feature, is really a fascinating one. I think almost every country, including the United States, but certainly every country in Southeast Asia can relate to his chapter, which sort of deals with the bargain that you have in dealing with China, a state that is everyone's top trade partner or close to top trade partner, but also a country that has appetites and ways of doing business that can be challenging to sovereignty issues. So I think he expressed those sort of issues well and diplomatically, and I will let him speak for himself now in a far better way than I could. Fikri, are you ready, sir?
Thank you very much, John. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Pacific Forum, for having me. So I'm Fikri. Today I'll be presenting on Malaysia-China policy on China's growing security concern. So I'll start with the key challenges, and then next my agreement, and then Malaysia-China policy reviews, and finally in policy recommendations. So first, the key challenges possessed by China for Malaysia is China's possessed two-pronged strategic behavior. First on the economy, and second on security. First on economy, China is Malaysia's biggest trading partner. I think it's like more than 10 years, consecutive years, China is Malaysia's biggest trading partners. In 2022, last year, China's bilateral trade with Malaysia 125 billion USD. And then Malaysia is among the widest host countries for the BRI. We have a wide array of partnerships on infrastructure, on railways, on digital, and also on energy. And then this kind of over dependencies has been mentioned many times and has been used as a tool for domestic political concerns. We can see that in general elections 2018, where Mahathir Mohamad has been used the issues on Chinese over dependencies on Malaysia as a political leverage. And then on security, we can see that Chinese assertiveness in South China Sea has been found very intriguing and through harassment to Malaysian vessels, encroachment near Malaysian waters, and you can see that key events related to this event is 2020 West Capella standoff and so 2021 PLA incursions near Malaysian airspace. This kind of securities challenges has been made has been remarks by Malaysian governments to respond. For example, on the PLA incursion has been the first response made by the Royal Military Air Force and then followed by Ministry of Foreign Affairs regarding the incursions. Next, the main argument for this chapter are argued that Malaysia needs to rely on Malaysia-China policy in accordance with the Defence White Paper in 2020 and also Wisma Putra foreign policy framework. So in that sense, Malaysia needs to gradually depart from its low-profile response on Chinese assertiveness towards a robust stance against China. When it comes to low-profile response, Malaysia's low-profile response can be seen through non-confrontational, indirect, open deference, and also indirect defiance against China. So in Defence White Paper and the framework has laid the foundation regarding the concerns of the South China Sea. For example, in the paper, especially mentioned on the occupation and also militarizations in the South China Sea, and indications of the East Malaysia are clear challenges to sovereign rights in the EEZ. And also it has been depicted as a perceived aggressive actions over the South China Sea. This has been mentioned in a Defence White Paper many times. So throughout history, Malaysia-China policy, previously Malaysia's foreign policy has been pro-West after independence in 1957. But then through Tun Razak and Tun Dr. Ismail, Malaysia's foreign policy has been shifted to non-alignment and neutrality. From that, in 1970, our malign relations with China has been changed to benign relations, and it was shaped by a 1974 diplomatic ties between Malaysia and China. Since then, Malaysia-China relations have been booming, and it was driven by the economic and trade partnerships. You can see that through economy, through trade, investment, also on the BRI. And BRI has consolidated cooperation between Malaysia and China, especially when Xi Jinping came to power and also when Najib Razak has become the Prime Minister. So BRI has been like a flagship project, like a flagship cooperation between Malaysia and China. So the policy recommendations for Malaysia-China policy in regards to Chinese assertiveness is first to have a robust diplomatic engagement towards China. This is through continuous and openly stating concerns over the South China Sea. Malaysia has done it many times through notes verbals, through the protest against China on the incursion, and also encroachment has been many times mentioned. But recent time, I think the last time the protest has been made is 2021. The current Malaysia has yet to do the open protest in regards to Chinese assertiveness. Even though it has been debated many times in the parliament, it has been debated many times through media, social media, but Malaysia has yet to openly do a protest or do some clear statements in regards to Chinese assertiveness, except when it comes to some controversy happens. For example, on the statement made by the Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. So only that Malaysia has reiterated through Wisma Putra on the commitment, saying that Malaysia's position on South China Sea is unchanged. So second is through the legal instrument. Malaysia has submitted 2009. This is a joint submission with Vietnam, In 2019, this is the sole submissions to Commission on the Limits of Continental Shelf. So through both submissions, it shows that Malaysia has been using a legal instrument driven by the UNCLOS. This through legal instrument, Malaysia has made and for legal instrument, Malaysia needs to have more move in order to stake its claim on the South China Sea. And also, Malaysia needs to urge the Code of Conduct to be concluded soon, although apparently we have like 2 second reading for the Code of Conduct, but Malaysia should urge for the Code of Conduct to be ratified soon, either legally binding or non-legally binding. And since Malaysia will be Asian Championship in 2025, Malaysia should move towards it in 2025 for the Code of Conduct to be ratified. Third one is to consolidate domestic capabilities. First, through streamline key agencies' operations and roles. Malaysia's key agencies, for example, on Malaysian Navy, Malaysian Armed Force, Malaysian Maritime Agency, enforcement agencies, is one of the key agencies that has been robustly engaged in the South China Sea. But in order to be more effective, all of these key agencies needs to streamline their engagement in order for the operation to be effective. And second one is the advancement of military assets, especially for the Air Force and the Navy. Malaysia has started advancing their assets through the procurement of LCS, LMS, littoral combat ship, and littoral mission ship. And also for this year 2023 national budget's defense, the budget has been increased a bit, but more budget needed to enhance and to advance the military assets. And finally, it's on a bilateral and multilateral platform. So Malaysia needs to leverage on ASEAN-led establishment to exert its centrality through ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and also by using the ASEAN-led platform, so Malaysia will drive its interests with ASEAN in order to stake its claim against the Chinese assertiveness. And also, Malaysia should focus more on joint training exercise and training with multiple partners. Malaysia has been key partners with the US and also Australia. So, and then with the emerging cooperation on the Coast Guard forums, and so Coast Guard partnership. So Malaysia should put their efforts by engaging with Coast Guard partnerships, either with intra-regional or extra-regional partners. So this is it from me. So in conclusion, again, Malaysia should engage China and Chinese assertiveness in the region through a robust engagement driven by Malaysia's defense white paper and also Malaysia's framework of foreign policy. So thank you very much. I'll pass it to John.
Just really enjoyed hearing from your ideas again, and really took something away from that in terms of how Malaysia can work through ASEAN in terms of furthering its perspective. Okay, so quickly moving on, if I can ask everyone, Katrina, you're on next. Katrina Guano is a senior project officer at UP, the Center of International de Formation de Autorités et Leaders, or the International Training Center for Authorities and Leaders. I'm not sure why is it in French, but anyway, I hope I said it correctly. She's currently studying, completing her master's in population studies at the University of the Philippines, Population Institute. I thought her paper is quite interesting. The first two probably deal with what we would call traditional security issues, state power, South China Sea. Katrina is going to take us towards climate change. But again, I promised originality and interest. She's not taking it in quite the direction that we tend to read about. She's taking it in a direction of how it impacts migration and populations. Katrina, are you ready to go?
Yes. Hello, everyone. First of all, So, first of all, thank you so much to the Pacific Forum for this wonderful opportunity, and of course your guidance throughout the process of working on our chapters. So It is my honor, of course, to share my title, my chapter titled When It Rains, It Pours, Disaster Displacement, and the Future of Human Security in the Philippines Amid Changing Climate. So let me walk you through what the chapter is all about. It contextualizes the Philippines and its experience in relation to disaster displacement and climate change. It also unpacks the nomenclatures and explores the nexus surrounding climate, migration, and human security. It provides an analysis of the complex causes and consequences relating to this nexus. And finally, it provides some policy prospects to the new frontiers of human security amid human mobility and the climate crisis. So as an introduction, climate migration is and will continue to be perceived as a non-traditional security threat. So climate migrants and displaced populations, whether staying temporarily or permanently, will be perceived as competition for scarce resources, leading to conflict and social tension in the host communities and countries. Especially amid changing climate, movements of people due to environment-related or climatic events have been at an all-time high. So the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, or IDMC, in 2020 recorded 30.7 million disaster displacements globally. Almost half of it is due to storms, and the other half is due to typhoons. The rest are are related to wildfires and other geophysical events. So the same IDMC report found that the Philippines has the second highest number of disaster displacements in 2020, with more than 4 million new displacements. So the Philippines, as well as other vulnerable countries, that includes the Pacific, small island developing states. In these countries, people will move as a response to or in anticipation of climatic events, whether sudden onset climatic events or slow onset events. This begs the question, do sudden and slow onset events leading to human mobility pose threats to national and security concerns? So let me preface this section by saying that there is no universally or legally accepted and agreed upon definition for the movements related to or induced by environmental reasons or climatic events. Yet climatic events will continue to drive people to flee their homes. So without a universally and legally accepted and agreed upon definition for the phenomenon, how do we ensure that climate migrants and displaced populations move in safe, dignified, orderly, and regular manner in terms of policy prospects, legal frameworks, etc.? The term environmental refugees, and I'm sure some of you or many of you have heard of this, was first used in the 1970s, but in more recent years, it's used in 2001, and it intends to describe refugees as the people who do not have secure livelihood in their homelands because of environmental problems, leading to migration as an alternative measure. So usually this movement describes a hazardous attempt, and this movement is predominantly internal with little to no possibility of return. However, there is a problem that lies in this term, as this is subject to questions, especially as the definition of refugee in the 1951 Convention on Refugees and the 1967 Protocol does not resonate with the term environmental refugees. Environmental refugees usually refer to people who just move within their countries, whereas a refugee is someone who moves cross-border. And there's also a question of the persecution, because nature or environment cannot be referred to as the persecutor in this case. So because of those concerns in terms of this particular terminology, the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, refers environmental migration instead, where environmental migrants are the people who move due to sudden or gradual changes in their environment, either forced or voluntary, temporary or permanent, and within or across borders. And climate migration or climate migrants is a subcategory to environmental migration and environmental migrants, respectively. So in the Philippine context, there have been several laws and policy documents developed in relation to displacement, climate change, and disaster risk. So for example, we have the National Climate Change Action Plan, or NCCAP 2011-2028, which recognizes that climate change is associated with human security concerns. The NCCAP recognizes the need to reduce the risks of climate change and disasters. In fact, one of its immediate outcomes is the development, promotion, and adoption of climate change adaptive human settlements and services, which require, as indicated in this particular figure, from the NCCAP require adaptive and secured settlement areas for vulnerable communities and climate refugees. The Philippines also has the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan, or NDRRMP 2020-2023, which recognizes the complexities of risks and acknowledges the need for discussion on displacement and migration for comprehensive disaster risk reduction management. It identifies disaster prevention and mitigation as one of its key result areas, with one of its outcomes to building disaster resilient human settlements, especially for families in high-risk areas. So in the Philippine nomenclature, these legal and policy frameworks refer to human mobility in relation to environmental factors. What you see on the screen, and usually Philippine documents use the terms such as evacuation, forced evacuation, preemptive evacuation, and internally displaced persons, or IDPs. So while these frameworks are able to identify key population movements in the Philippines, disaster and climate change context, the global community has yet to institutionalize, if that would be a possibility or a prospect, a universally accepted nomenclature to describe the nexus of such a complex phenomenon. So regardless of the ongoing debates on terminologies and nomenclatures, what stands right now is that climate change, migration, and human security have a complex interaction, and their relationship is never linear. Their causes and consequences bring about certain threat perceptions for major host communities and countries. So earlier we asked if slow and sudden onset events leading to human mobility pose threats to security. So of course, sudden and slow onset events differ in terms of their impact to human mobility and consequently to security. Sudden onset events such as typhoons, floods, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions drive human mobility in the forms of preemptive evacuation, forced evacuation, internal displacement. These are linked to threats to security such as human rights violations, explosive hazards, looting as well. Whereas slow onset events such as sea level rise, salination, ocean acidification, and drought, these drive human mobility in the forms of migration and planned relocation. So these are linked to threats relating to conflict and social tension due to increased competition in scarce resources in the host communities. To better illustrate the causes and consequences of climate migration security nexus, we can look at the power dynamics between the global north and the global south, where the global north is composed of affluent and industrialized nations which have been responsible for excess carbon emissions. And these are the major destination of many types of migrants, including climate migrants. However, they have the tightened immigration policies and border patrol in the name of national security. Meanwhile, and ironically, the global south is composed of vulnerable countries with developing economies at the front line of climate change. But yeah, as I said, ironically, they have the least carbon emissions. These are the major origin countries of many types of migrants, including climate migrants. They have limited capacity for in situ adaptation and restricted pathway for migration. This relationship between the global north and global south shows that securitization of climate migration has been centered on territorial integrity, political stability, possibly military and defense arrangement, and economic and financial activities rather than human security. So climate and mobility open up new frontiers of human security. Climate change, disaster, and human mobility amid these situations are considered non-traditional security issues with a ripple effect on human security. But such interaction is what constitutes an impending silent crisis. So the securitization of migration has been centered on territorial integrity, political stability, possibly migration and defense arrangement, and even economic and financial activities, as we said, instead of human security, because of these particular threat perceptions for major host communities and countries. Now, moving forward, it is imperative that policy prospects consider counter-securitization and human security-centric solutions. So prior to migration, there should have been adaptation and climate risk management mechanisms in place. This entails that the most vulnerable countries are equipped with adaptive capacity and climate financing to avert, minimize, and address the adverse effects of sudden and slow onset events, as well as the impacts of climate change. such strategies should also take into consideration the fact that human mobility is part of the response to climate risks and impacts, while ensuring that the movement of people is done in a safe, dignified, orderly, and regular manner. It is also imperative that major contributors to climate change are held accountable by ensuring that they commit to their nationally determined contributions, particularly in climate financing, to compensate for loss and damages and to support adaptation and build resilience building in developing countries. Likewise, it is also necessary to mainstream the need to pave migration pathways for climate migrants and eliminate anti-immigrant sentiments. In the event of migration, it is imperative that environmental and climate migrants have access to protections for children, gender-based violence, explosive hazards, housing, as well as land and property rights. And it is also imperative that host communities and countries are able to enforce the prevention of and response to human rights violations, including access to justice, grievance mechanisms, services, and documentation provisions, as well as psychological support for those in distressed situations. So with the urgency of the ongoing climate crisis and the impending mass population movement, there is a need for a paradigm shift from a state-centric security perspective to a human security approach to climate migration. Of course, there's no blueprint for a guaranteed response to disaster displacement and human security, but there has to be a global dialogue on such an urgent issue because at the end of the day, it is the most vulnerable population that is most insecure. So these are some of the references I used in my chapter as well as in this presentation. Sorry for going a bit over time. Thank you so much for listening.
Not to worry. As I mentioned, very luckily, Fikri gave us a minute and a bit, so we're perfectly on time to where we should be. Okay, so we are really wrapping up for our last presentation. I think this one was most striking for me in terms of its originality from the sort of things that think tanks deal with, or at least foreign policy think tanks deal with. I think this was a domestic think tank issue, but for that, it's couched in a sort of foreign policy format, which is why I find it very fascinating. Arawat Joseph Ma Asavanada is a PhD candidate at the Department of Politics, Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong. He has a Chinese ethnic background, but he's from Thailand, and he has a very interesting paper, a sort of perspective on migration through the lens of brain drain. So with that, Arawat, are you ready, sir? Have you come up on the net? Yes, you have. So I will give the floor over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you, John. And let me share my screen. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are on the world. And greeting from Hong Kong. And thanks, John, for my introduction of myself. And today I'm going to talk about Thailand brain drain challenge and the trends and implications. There are a few key things that I want to share, and based on my practice, it can fit in 10 minutes. So without problems, no big deal. Let's get started. So there are three parts of my presentation: the challenge, the trends, and the implication. And yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the first part. The first part is the challenge. So I'm gonna identify the challenge Thailand is now facing, and also as the title suggests, I am discussing brain drain challenge. So I highlight here and there that it is imminent brain drain because it's not presently happening right now, but it's likely happen in the foreseeable future, and it is ground to believe and to be worried about it. So many young Thai professionals and skilled workers are currently considering walking away from Thailand. This challenge still receives scant attention from the government and the society at large. And my work looks at the structural level or the condition of the problems. What I am afraid of is that unless this problem get properly addressed, soon in the future, whenever things come to a head, it is almost impossible to reverse them. So it's really important for us to tackle this problem now. So let me clarify a bit further about these problems. So for some countries, it's quite common for people to move abroad to work. For the Thai society or many Asian society in general, we tend to stick to our homeland and we stick to our family, but things started to change. So those considering living in Thailand are generally educated or well-trained to compete internationally, and they are seeking a long-term career that can later translate into opportunities to live permanently or secure new citizenship abroad. So that's why they are considering living in Thailand for good. However, this part can be the problems, but another part can also be a problem as well. The fact that the Thai government has so far seemingly held a misperception of this phenomenon, deeming the outward-looking talents unpatriotic, and that show little interest in addressing this concern. So in short, many young Thai people who are educated, who are well-trained, want to go abroad and then to live abroad. But for the Thai government, they doesn't seem to look at this phenomenon as a problem. They say those who want to live are unpatriotic, and then they show little interest in addressing this concern. So again, recap the concern is that the exodus of the country brightest minds could cause severe problems to the country's development, but turning a blind eye to the causes of their frustration or misinterpreting their motives can also be equally harmful. The second part, the trends. So I will quickly go to my theoretical framework or the framework that I use to analyze this phenomenon. So when I talk about the trends, I'm not talking out of nowhere, but I base my analysis on the framework, the so-called push and pull factors. Well, put it this way, when push and pull factors in a nutshell, so push and pull factor. Push factor is something that push you away from the country of origin, and the pull factor, on the other hand, they are the factors that pull you into the countries of destination. However, reverse functions can also happen. Push and pull factors are in both departure and destination countries. For one individual who want to move abroad, the countries of destination might have some push factor that they say, oh, don't come here, and they try to push you back to the country of origin. And at the same time, there are many things in the country of origin that you might fancy. So country of origin can also have pull factors. So push and pull factor are simultaneously, and they are in both departure and destination countries. So let's look at these graphics. So you can see that number one is something that you don't like about Thailand. So it's the push factor from Thailand. And the second, you can see that the pull from abroad. So many Thai people, when they look at other countries, they find passion, they fancy those countries. So it's going to be pull from abroad. And one or two combined, they will push someone out from Thailand. But for number three, you can see that many people, they love the beach, they love good food, they love the family in Thailand. So Thailand can also have pull factor. And the push from abroad, many people, when they experience hardship outside, they want to come back to Thailand, and it's push factor from abroad. So these four factors, they work simultaneously in the mind of those aspiring migrants. So let's look at the trends. So the key timeline. So during 1960 or in the past, Thai medical professionals went abroad, but after this time until present, most of those who work abroad are non or semi-skilled workers who seek overseas to escape economic hardship at home, and they engage in labor-intensive industries. So, simply put, it's driven mostly by income differential. The forming wave is quite different because those considering moving out are again those who are educated, those who are well trained, those who are able to speak foreign languages well. So, and they are quite more conscious about political consideration. So political consideration is a stimulus that push them out of Thailand. It's no longer only about economic incentives, but more and more people they care about political consideration. And as a result, they want to seek long-term white-collar career abroad. And because they are going to work in the skill sector, so they hope to stay long-term. And in order to stay long-term, they try to seek permanent residency or even citizenship. And what complicates the current situation is a dual change in the calculus. So I want to direct attention to the new push and pull factors. You can see that nowadays, for the push factor from Thailand are now related to political consideration, for example, suppression by the government. But my disclaimer and then my caveat is that when I was writing this article, Thailand was under the junta government, but now Thailand just had the election and now it is promising that Thailand will have a new government. But this paper is still based on the situation during the past government. And the country uncertain political future and also the past government mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic or simple the crisis management. And the pull factor from abroad, you can see that nowadays many developed countries are entering the age of the aged society. So they try to relax visa requirement in the age of talent war. They try to bring in talent from all over the world. So many developed countries entering aged society, and they want new talents from all over the world to continue pushing their country forward. So Thai people, especially those educated ones, see this as opportunity. So the implication is that youth or the young people are very important for Thailand development trajectory. Young people are promising resource for country future and a vital agent for change and progress. And Thailand is striving to become a developed country by 2037. And Thailand is soon entering the super aged society where more than 20% of the total population is 60 years old and older. So in short, Thailand not only could not afford to lose its young people, it needs them more than ever. And for the policy recommendation, I think it's high time the government paid serious attention to this challenge and exercise restraint when dealing with discontent youth. This is the short-term recommendation. And for the medium-term and long-term recommendation, I suggest the government implement structural reform, enhancing government effectiveness and transparency, augment the country global competitiveness, and also improve people quality of life and public goods. And the government also should encourage youth to gain more overseas exposure, because when the government try to encourage youth to gain more overseas exposure, they send them out and then they take them in. But if the government try to suppress them, they will push all the young people go and will never go back. So thank you very much for your time listening to me and for your attention, and look forward to the Q&A session later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arawat. And if I can ask you to stay with your camera on, sir, and I'll ask the other panelists to turn on their cameras as well as we slide into the panel discussion. And just as a point of sort of etiquette for those of you at home who are watching this and you'd like to engage with our panelists through questions, there's two ways you can do it. The first way, of course, is raise your hand you can see the raise your hand function at the bottom of your computer, and wait for someone to turn on your mic, which will be done. I'll try to call on you in the order that I see, and someone will help turn on your mic. The second way is to write in the webinar chat. If you go to the chat feature, you press chat, it will open up on the right side of your screen, and I will also keep an eye on that. As you can see at the moment, the full publication is there for those of you who might want to look at it. Okay, so while you all are preparing yourselves and thinking about good questions to ask our panelists, I might ask a couple of questions just to get us warmed up and to allow the audience time to things for people. So the first question I had really was, you mentioned there was changes in the system in Thailand. This would be one question for you in terms of the junta and now to a democratic rule. Do you think brain drain is a political issue, an economic issue, or which of the, or both, and which of those is more in the driving seat? Katrina, I'll ask a quick question to you as well. I'll just sort of work my way down. You mentioned that these populations are to some extent inevitable because of the climate change issues. To some extent, you frame it as a national issue, but is it also an international issue? To what extent should countries be trying to use international forum for resolving these issues? And then a question to Fikri: what's the balance in terms of how do you decide what's more important to a country in terms of the sovereignty or the national interest of economic growth and a developing economy? Those two things are extremely important for countries. Having populations that are prosperous and well off, and people with jobs is very important. So how do you balance those two things? What's the decisive issue for you in terms of your writing? And then finally, with Wei, I really appreciate the sort of nondescript, sort of humble but also strong approach that Brunei has presented on this issue. What I'm curious about is whether or not, because it's so nondescript, that it gets overlooked. Is there a danger that by being sort of somewhat quiet on these issues, that Brunei's voice is not heard enough? So those are some questions to think about. So I'll go back to Arawat. First question to you, just maybe for a minute, no longer, or a minute and a half for your answer, please.
All right, John, thank you so much for your question. So I will address your question, and then I will give you more insights about this question. First of all, in the Thai society, economic factors are still prevailing factors. It's one of the most important factors, because in terms of getting something in to the stomach, it's about economic well-being, and people need to eat, people need to drink. So economic is the underlying condition. However, the political situation is the stimulating factor. So the process, as long as the income differential between Thailand and abroad are still there, so people will still move out, but political consideration will make the process faster, and they push the people moving out faster. So apart from Thailand, the insights that I get from doing this research also apply to the case of Hong Kong, or the place where I am living right now. So you can see that different from the case of Thailand, many people in Hong Kong, they move out, especially young people. They already relatively better off compared to the global standard, but they still want to move out of Hong Kong, not because of the economic hardship, but because of their political consideration. So this is the two perspectives that might contrasting to each other, the perspective from Thailand and perspective from Hong Kong. All right, thank you.
succinct, and I do ask everyone keep it short, just as we have a couple of questions coming through now. Katrina.
Yeah, so well, climate change and migration, of course, it's difficult to assess to which extent it will be just a national issue, or to which extent it will have to be considered as a national issue. So while, for example, sudden onset events usually just affect in it usually just drives internal migration. There are, of course, the impacts of climate change is not for a single country alone, and so for that very reason, that it's a global climate change is a global phenomenon, and the responsibilities in relation to the nationally to loss and damages should be a shared responsibility between among all countries. Is It makes it not just a national issue in the case of the Philippines or other vulnerable countries, but also an international issue, regardless of the nature of movement, regardless whether the movement is internal or cross-border.
Wei, how would you respond to my sort of little bit challenge that Brunei can sometimes be overlooked?
Right. So I think just to refresh the memory, I think the question was, does Brunei's quietness ever, or well, does it actually pose a challenge, regardless if it's on a local scale or a regional scale? Am I correct? And to that, in my humble opinion, I would personally think that it is actually not a risk at this very moment. And that is because for a few reasons. The first reason is being that its EEZs has not been interrupted so far. You know, unlike in the cases of Philippines, Vietnam, as well as Malaysia, where it has actually observed the appearance of Chinese vessels in their EEZs. Brunei has not seen any Chinese appearance on its own EEZs, and therefore, and it's not announced. And I would like to do correct me if I'm wrong, but the other appearances of the vessels in other parts of the states are actually unannounced. So far, there hasn't been any cases where it's unannounced on Bruneian waters, and therefore, then in the Bruneian perspective, then it has not sort of put anything on its security at risk. I think following that itself, I think it's also not a risk for Brunei to be quiet, because as opposed to being vocal on the international level when it comes to the South China Sea disputes, I would like to argue that Brunei has actually succeeded fairly in the balancing act between the US-China rivalry. As I've mentioned before, they have individual and very robust relationships with the US. It's sometimes military exercises and as well as educational exchanges. In terms of China, it has relations when it comes to economic trade, especially when it comes to Hengi Industries and the development of a cross-district bridge. So in that sense, I think Brunei has actually fared quite well when it comes to protecting its own waters, and it's seen very clearly through its successful balancing act between both rivals. And yeah, I think just to wrap up my statement is, as opposed to asking why Brunei is not assertive when it comes to the South China Sea dispute, I think it's good to ask us what good does it bring to Brunei if we were ever to raise our voice regarding the South China Sea dispute. Thank you.
Okay, we have two questions online. Please keep them coming. The first one, Fikri, because we didn't get to you, if you don't mind, I'd like to offer it to you first. Excellent discussion so far, really interesting. Question for any attendee. Do you believe ASEAN, as it functions now, is suited to manage the security issues discussed so far in Southeast Asia? And since you mentioned a little bit of ASEAN in your Malaysian chapter, I would love for you to have a go at that. Is that okay? Obviously. Issues there. Why don't we drop that back to, since we just came off of a regional national question, to Katrina. Katrina, we were just mentioning, whether international organizations should deal with the sort of migration, climate change issues. Is ASEAN a suitable body to deal with that, do you think?
The ASEAN has its own plan of action in terms of disaster risk financing and insurance. And it has established a Southeast Asia disaster risk insurance facility. So there is a mechanism in place to how that will materialize is something that how that will materialize in the upcoming threats to the upcoming impacts of disaster, and later on the much bigger impacts of climate change, specifically sea level rise. That is something that we have yet to see. I think it also has something to do with the political will of the ASEAN member states. So as ASEAN as a whole, we do have we've seen that there is a mechanism in place, but moving forward on that, beyond the ASEAN member states, we also have to see how the ASEAN will bring it forth to the international community and forge the bilateral, more multilateral cooperation with other regions, including those in the global north.
We've gone over a little bit. I hope you and our audience don't mind that we're going to go to at least for the 40 past the hour, if that's all right with you, and then we'll wrap up for the last few minutes. So my apologies that we've gone over, but I have so enjoyed hearing from you. So it's your fault because you're so interesting. Okay, the second question. What's the relationship between the traditional and non-traditional security issues? Would anyone like to have a stab at that? I feel like you can answer that. What's the relationship between these traditional and non-traditional security issues?
Yeah, I can jump in with that. Right. So simply put, in the past when we talk about security issues, it's traditional because it focuses on the military. And then because now we are entering the globalized age, and then there are less and less favor and favor fightings in the region. Although we still have the military fighting around the world, but it favor than in the past. But nowadays, when we talk about the security of human, we no longer care only about getting killed by the military action, but now we see that a human is quite insecure because they do not enough food to eat, or they have the polluted environment, or the poverty or something. So the linkage between traditional and non-traditional security is that nowadays the shifting focus is from military balance that is in the traditional security to the human focused security that is the non-traditional security. All right, that's my perspective.
Okay. The ASEAN question, we'll leave that. Is ASEAN? Here's the question for you, for any one of the panelists. One last panelist: is ASEAN well set up to deal with the issue that you described? East Asia panel, really, but since ASEAN,
Can I? Sorry, John, can you hear me? Yeah, finally. Okay. Thank you for ASEAN. I think yes. I think ASEAN should and play the role in security issues in the region, especially with the South China Sea. Even though we have overlapping claims, Malaysia have overlapping claims with other countries, Vietnam and other countries, but still it is the best way possible. And through ASEAN, China Code of Conduct. It is one of the way that can be done through confidence building measure in helping to reduce the tension and to help with the South China Sea issues to resolve. And not only that, I think we can go to Coast Guard partnerships, Coast Guard ASEAN Forum, and other avenues that can be used through ASEAN, not only to engage with Chinese assassins, but also the big power wherever in the region. Thank you.
I think that was really great. And we had one panelist say, one guest has signed off saying, I really enjoyed the panel, great job. So I'd like to reiterate that. You all did very, very well. And we at Pacific Forum are super grateful to you, not only for spending the time with us now, but actually for committing to thinking. You know, this is what a think tank does. We sit here and we think, and we get bright things like you, bright people like you to think. And I hope that, you know, we put your report on the internet. You can see it in the chat link. If you use social media or traditional media, feel free to, you know, push it out there, print it, show it to friends, and, you know, hopefully someone will come up to you and look at your ideas and say, you know, we should develop this. That's the whole point of a think tank, is to try to promote better policies, better governance, and better relations among nations. So with that, I want to ask the audience, all of you virtually online, to put your hands together and say thank you to our wonderful panelists. So thank you so much, really, for taking the time today. And as I said before, taking the time to support our program with Luce Foundation, getting voices from the region out. With that, I'm going to wrap up on my side, and unless Carol Lee, I'll hand it off to you, unless I've not mentioned anything. If there's any logistics and issues to be, feel free to step in.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. Just some quick reminders. This is part 1 of 2. So our next webinar will be this week, featuring 3 other authors. And it will be on Friday, June 23rd at 8 a.m. And so please, you can use the same webinar link as you did today to rejoin that webinar. And again, in the chat box, we highly encourage you to read this publication that our wonderful young leaders have put together. And finally, we do have a post-event survey. So please take the time to fill out this post-event survey so that we can hear your feedback on our programming for the future. Thank you.